When my son Kevin told me he needed access to my retirement accounts to help me maximize my returns, I trusted him completely. After all, he was a financial consultant. What could possibly go wrong? 18 months later, I discovered $340,000 missing from accounts I'd spent 40 years building. But Kevin had no idea that his wife's brother, Todd, had left a digital trail that would catch the attention of people far more dangerous than an angry father. By the time I was done, federal agents were knocking on their door at dawn, and my son learned the hardest lesson of his life. You won't believe how this unfolded. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The coffee at Powell's Books always tasted better when shared with my son. That September afternoon, Kevin and I sat in the cafe on the second floor, surrounded by towers of books and the comfortable hum of Portland's literary heart.
Rain streaked the windows, typical for autumn in Oregon, and I remembered thinking how grateful I was that my boy had turned out so well. Kevin stirred his americano with the silver spoon Amber had given him for their anniversary. Everything about my son looked successful. The tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, the confidence in his posture, the easy smile that reminded me so much of his mother before cancer took her 6 years ago. "Dad, I've been thinking about your retirement accounts." He set down his cup with precision. "You've got, maybe another 5 years before you want to fully retire?" 3, actually. I'm 68, Kev. The engineering contracts are getting harder to manage. My back isn't what it used to be." Exactly my point. He leaned forward, and I could see the concern in his eyes. Genuine concern, or so I believed at the time. "You've worked so hard your entire life, Boeing, all those defense contracts, building that consulting business from scratch after Mom died. You deserve to retire comfortably." "I'm doing fine. The accounts are solid. Your mother and I were always careful with money." "But are they optimized?" Kevin pulled out his tablet, swiping through screens filled with graphs and numbers that made my engineer's brain sit up and pay attention. "Dad, you're leaving money on the table. With my access to institutional investment platforms, I could potentially increase your returns by 8 to 12% annually." The numbers sounded good. Too good, I would realize later. But this was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike in Laurelhurst Park, the young man who'd called me crying when his mother took her last breath, the father of my grandchildren, Lily and Mason, who still drew me pictures and called me Grandpa Walt. "I don't know, Kevin. Those accounts have specific beneficiaries, tax implications. It's complicated. Which is exactly why you need someone who understands the complexity." He reached across the table and put his hand on mine. "Dad, I do this for a living. Amber and I have tripled our net worth in 5 years using these same strategies. I just want you to have the retirement you've earned." The rain picked up outside, drumming against the old building's windows. Around us, people browsed books, sipped coffee, lived their ordinary lives, with no idea that in that moment, I was making the worst financial decision of my life. "What would you need from me?" "Just authorization to act on your behalf. Power of attorney for the investment accounts. You'd still own everything, still have full access. I'd just be able to move funds between higher yield opportunities without having to call you for approval every time. Think of it like giving me the keys to help you drive, but it's still your car." The metaphor made sense. Everything Kevin said made sense. That was the problem with con artists in your own family. They knew exactly which buttons to push, which fears to soothe, which dreams to amplify. "Let me think about it." "Of course." Kevin smiled and changed the subject to Lily's soccer season and Mason's obsession with building model rockets. We talked for another hour, and by the time we left, I'd almost forgotten about the investment conversation. Almost. That night, alone in my Cedar Hills ranch house, I pulled out the folders containing 40 years of financial planning. Account statements from my Boeing 401k, the rollover IRA I'd managed since retirement, the brokerage account funded by selling the house after Margaret died, the smaller accounts earmarked for my grandchildren's college funds. $387,000. Not a fortune by tech industry standards, But for an aerospace engineer who'd weathered recessions and medical bills and the cost of burying a wife, it represented security, freedom, the ability to live my final decades without depending on anyone. I thought about Kevin's confident smile, his obvious success, the beautiful home in West Lynn where my grandchildren grew up in safety and comfort. If he could help me turn that $387,000 into something more, why wouldn't I let him? He was family. Family helped each other. The following week, I signed the papers at Kevin's office downtown. The space occupied the 20th floor of a glass tower with views of Mount Hood on clear days. His assistant, a young woman named Stephanie, who couldn't have been more than 25, brought me coffee in a real porcelain cup while Kevin reviewed the documents with his lawyer present. "This just authorizes me to make investment decisions on your behalf, Mr. Harrison." The lawyer, a thin man named Morris, pointed to each section with a gold pen. "You retain full ownership. You can revoke this authorization at any time. Standard stuff for family wealth management." I signed my name 7 times. Walter James Harrison, the same signature I'd used on aerospace contracts worth millions. The same signature that had been on my marriage license, on Margaret's death certificate, on the deed to every home I'd ever owned. Kevin shook my hand afterward, and I noticed his watch, a Rolex, the kind that cost more than I'd spent on my truck. Success suited him. I wanted to believe I'd helped him achieve it by being a good father, by working long hours to pay for his college, by modeling the kind of work ethic that built stable lives. "You won't regret this, Dad." He walked me to the elevator. "Give me 6 months and you'll see returns you never thought possible." The elevator descended 20 floors, and I watched the Portland skyline compress and expand through the glass walls. Somewhere in my chest, a small voice whispered that something felt wrong. The voice sounded like Margaret. She always had instincts about people, even people we loved. I should have listened to that voice. I should have torn up those papers and walked away. But I was a father who wanted to believe in his son's success, an old man who wanted to trust that family meant something beyond blood and obligation. 3 months later, I tried to access my primary brokerage account to check my balance before making an offer on a small cabin near Bend. I'd been dreaming about that cabin for years, a place to fish, to read, to watch the seasons change without the noise of suburban Portland pressing in from all sides. The account showed a balance of $3,247. I stared at the screen, certain I'd made a mistake. I logged out and logged back in. Same number. I called the customer service line, sitting on hold for 17 minutes while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Mr. Harrison, I see several large transfers out of this account over the past 90 days. The representative's voice carried professional sympathy. "The authorizations all came from Kevin Harrison using the power of attorney on file." "How large?" "The largest single transfer was $127,000 on October 15th. There were 6 other transfers ranging from $22,000 to $51,000. The funds were moved to various investment vehicles and offshore accounts, all properly authorized under your existing agreement." My hands went numb. The phone nearly slipped from my grip. "I transferred a total of how much?" "From this account alone, $340,000.
You currently have $3,247 remaining, which is below our minimum balance threshold. We'll need to discuss closing the account or adding funds to maintain it." I hung up without responding. The room tilted sideways. 40 years of careful saving, of compound interest and diversified holdings, of saying no to vacations I couldn't afford and cars I didn't need. Gone. Moved to places I couldn't see for purposes I didn't understand, by a son I'd trusted with everything. The autumn light slanted through my windows, golden and cruel. Outside, my neighbor Frank Delgado was raking leaves, his movements slow and methodical, a man content with the simple rhythm of maintaining his small piece of earth. He'd worked for Boeing too, in the manufacturing division. We'd retired around the same time.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The difference was, Frank still had his retirement savings. I should have called Kevin immediately, demanded answers. Instead, I sat in my recliner until the light faded and the room grew dark, trying to understand how the boy I'd raised could steal my future while looking me in the eye and calling it help. When I finally moved, it was to pour myself 3 fingers of whiskey I couldn't afford anymore and pull up my banking app to see what other damage had been done. The number on the screen confirmed what I already knew in my bones. My son had robbed me blind. And somewhere in West Lynn, in a house worth $750,000, Kevin was probably having dinner with his family, tucking my grandchildren into beds I'd helped pay for, sleeping soundly next to a wife who'd encouraged every penny of theft. The whiskey burned going down, but not nearly as much as the realization that I'd lost more than money. I'd lost the ability to trust the one person who should have been trustworthy. I'd lost the fantasy that being a good father guaranteed having a good son. But Kevin had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed that because I was old and trusting, I was also helpless. He'd forgotten that I'd spent 40 years solving complex problems, managing million-dollar contracts, navigating corporate bureaucracy and federal regulations. My son thought he could steal my retirement and I'd simply accept it, too embarrassed to fight back, too old to seek justice. He was about to learn that some engineers never stop solving problems, and this particular problem was about to become very, very complicated for everyone involved. I set down my empty glass and reached for my phone. But I didn't call Kevin. Instead, I called the one person I knew who understood both betrayal and the long game required to make things right. Frank Delgado answered on the second ring. "Walt, everything okay?" "No," I said quietly. "Everything is very much not okay, but it's about to be." Frank Delgado had the kind of face that made people trust him immediately, weathered by 60 years of honest work, creased with laugh lines that spoke of a man who'd found joy in simple things. We sat at his kitchen table the next morning, my bank statements spread between us like evidence at a crime scene. $340,000. Frank's voice held no judgment, only the careful assessment of someone who understood numbers. "Walt, this isn't just family drama. This is federal wire fraud." "I know." My coffee had gone cold in the mug, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it anyway. My stomach had been a knot since yesterday's discovery. "But he's my son, Frank. If I report this, Kevin goes to prison. My grandchildren lose their father. Amber will never let me see Lillian Mason again." "And if you don't report it?" Frank leaned back in his chair, the morning light from his kitchen window casting shadows across his face. "You lose everything you worked for. You spend whatever years you have left struggling to survive on Social Security alone. Kevin learns that stealing from family has no consequences. What kind of lesson is that for those grandchildren you're trying to protect?" The words hit harder than I expected. I'd spent all night wrestling with the same questions, pacing my empty house while the ghosts of better times whispered from every corner. Margaret's voice in my head, reminding me that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was enabling. I don't even know where to start. I stared at the numbers on the statements, trying to make sense of the transfers. Look at these accounts. Some of them I've never heard of. Cayman International Holdings, Apex Venture Capital. Who moves retirement savings to the Cayman Islands? Frank pulled the statements closer, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the details. Someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Someone with experience in hiding money. He looked up at me. "Walt, does Kevin have a partner? Someone who might be more sophisticated with this kind of thing?" The question triggered a memory I'd been trying to suppress. Last Thanksgiving at Kevin's house, Amber's brother Todd holding court in the living room, explaining cryptocurrency investments to anyone who'd listen. The way Kevin had watched him with something that looked like admiration mixed with envy. The expensive car Todd drove, despite claiming to be an independent financial advisor with no major clients anyone could name. Amber's brother. Todd Collins. I felt my jaw tighten.
He's always talking about investment opportunities, offshore accounts, ways to maximize returns while minimizing tax exposure. Kevin mentioned consulting with him before approaching me about the accounts. Frank's expression darkened. Todd Collins. I'm going to look him up. He pulled out his phone and started typing. Within minutes, his screen filled with information that made my chest constrict. Walt, your son's brother-in-law has a history. 3 complaints filed with the SEC for unauthorized trading. 2 civil suits from former clients alleging mismanagement of funds. Nothing that stuck legally, but the pattern is clear. So, Todd convinced Kevin to steal from me. The words tasted bitter. Or Kevin convinced Todd to help him access money he felt entitled to. Frank set down his phone. Does it matter which one is more guilty? The result is the same. Your retirement is gone, moved through accounts designed to obscure the trail. This isn't amateur hour, Walt. This is organized theft with sophistication behind it. I stood up and walked to Frank's kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street where we'd both lived for over a decade. Normal houses with normal families facing normal problems. Not sons who robbed their fathers. Not brothers-in-law who facilitated financial crimes. Just people trying to get through life with some dignity intact. What do I do? The question came out smaller than I intended. You document everything. Frank started gathering the statements into organized piles. Every transfer, every account, every communication you had with Kevin about this arrangement. Then you contact the FBI. The FBI? I turned to face him. Frank, that's not just reporting theft. That's declaring war on my own family. Your family declared war on you when they stole $340,000 from your retirement accounts. Frank's voice hardened in a way I'd rarely heard. You're thinking like a father. Start thinking like a victim of a crime because that's what you are. Kevin made a choice. He chose money over integrity. He chose to betray the man who raised him, who paid for his education, who trusted him completely. Those are his choices, Walt, not yours. The truth of it settled over me like a heavy coat. I'd spent 40 years making careful choices, planning for a future where I'd have security and peace. Kevin had destroyed that future in 3 months, and I was standing here worrying about protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. How long will it take? I returned to the table, looking at the documents with new eyes. These weren't just bank statements anymore. They were evidence. The FBI Financial Crimes Division moves fast when they want to. Frank pulled out a notepad and started writing. But you need to be prepared for what comes next. They'll investigate Kevin, probably Amber too, since she's his spouse. They'll examine every account, every transfer, every business dealing your son had. If Todd is involved, and I'd bet money he is, the investigation expands to him. This gets big, Walt. Really big. My phone buzzed on the table. Kevin's name flashed on the screen.
The 3rd call since last night. I'd ignored them all, not trusting myself to speak to him without rage bleeding through every word. Don't answer it. Frank put his hand over mine. Not until you've talked to the authorities. Anything you say to him now could complicate the case. He might destroy evidence. He might move more money. You need professional help before you confront him. I let the call go to voicemail. Seconds later, a text message appeared. Dad, we need to talk about the accounts. There's been some temporary liquidity issues, but everything will be resolved soon. Trust me. Trust me. The same words he'd used at Powell's books 3 months ago. The same words that had convinced me to sign over power of attorney. The same words that had cost me my future. I'm meeting with them today. I stood up, gathering the statements. Frank, I need you to come with me. I need someone who can think clearly when I can't. Frank nodded and grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. Let me call ahead. I know someone in the Portland field office. Worked with him on a consulting project years ago. He'll make sure you talk to the right people. As we walked to my truck, I took one last look at my quiet street in Cedar Hills. The modest ranch houses with their trimmed lawns and sensible cars.
the life I had built on honest work and careful planning. By tonight, everything would change. By tomorrow, federal agents would know my son's name. By next week, Kevin might understand that stealing from family didn't just break trust, sometimes it broke laws that came with prison sentences. The drive downtown felt longer than usual. Frank made calls from the passenger seat, his voice calm and professional as he explained the situation to someone named Chen. Special Agent Rebecca Chen, he mouthed to me between sentences. White-collar crimes. She's expecting us. The FBI field office occupied several floors of a nondescript building near the waterfront. Security was tighter than I expected. Metal detectors, ID checks, visitor badges that tracked our movement through the building. This was real. This was happening. Special Agent Chen met us in a conference room on the 7th floor. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail and eyes that assessed everything in the room within seconds. She shook my hand with a firm grip that spoke of competence and control. Mr. Harrison, I understand you're here to report suspected financial fraud involving family members. She gestured to the chairs around a table that looked designed for interrogations. I've reviewed the preliminary information Frank shared. This could be a complex case, so I need you to walk me through everything from the beginning. Don't leave anything out, even if it seems embarrassing or makes you feel foolish. I laid out the bank statements, the power of attorney documents, the timeline of transfers. I explained the conversation at Powell's books, Kevin's promises about maximizing returns, my complete trust in a son who'd never given me reason to doubt him before. Agent Chen took notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking questions that cut straight to the heart of each transaction. These offshore accounts, she tapped her pen against one of the statements, Cayman International Holdings specifically. Did Kevin ever explain why retirement funds would need to be moved offshore? He said it was about tax optimization, international investment vehicles that offered better returns with legal tax advantages. I felt heat rise in my face. I'm an engineer, not a financial expert. It sounded plausible when he explained it. It's designed to sound plausible. Agent Chen pulled out her laptop and started typing. That's how these schemes work, just enough truth mixed with exploitation of trust. Mr. Harrison, I'm going to be direct with you. What you're describing shows indicators of a sophisticated theft operation, possibly involving multiple parties. The offshore accounts, the speed of the transfers, the complexity of the paper trail. This suggests planning and expertise beyond a son acting alone. Amber's brother, Todd Collins. Frank spoke up from beside me. He has a history with the SEC, complaints about unauthorized trading, civil suits from former clients. Walt mentioned Kevin consulted with Todd before approaching him about the accounts. Agent Chen's fingers moved faster across her keyboard. Todd Collins, financial advisor, self-employed, operates out of Lake Oswego. She looked up, her expression grave. Mr. Harrison, Todd Collins is already on our radar. We've been building a case involving investment fraud targeting elderly clients. If he's involved in your situation, this investigation just became much larger in scope. My mouth went dry. You're saying Kevin got involved with someone you're already investigating? I'm saying your son may have partnered with someone engaged in an ongoing criminal enterprise. Agent Chen closed her laptop, which means we need to move quickly. These operations tend to collapse once they know law enforcement is involved. Money disappears, evidence gets destroyed, people flee. With your permission, I'd like to begin a formal investigation immediately. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air conditioning too cold. This was the moment where everything became official, where my son transformed from family into suspect, where love and duty crashed into justice and consequences. What happens to Kevin? The question barely made it past my throat. If the evidence supports charges, he'll be arrested and prosecuted for wire fraud, theft, possibly money laundering, depending on what we find. Federal charges carry significant prison time, Mr. Harrison. I won't lie to you about that. If your son is guilty of what these documents suggest, he's facing years behind bars. And my money? Can I get it back? Asset recovery is complicated with offshore accounts, but we'll pursue every avenue. She pulled out a formal complaint form. However, I need you to understand that restitution isn't guaranteed. Some of these funds may be permanently lost. Our priority is stopping the criminal activity and holding perpetrators accountable. I looked at Frank, who nodded encouragement. Then I looked at the papers spread across the table. 40 years of my life reduced to transaction records and account numbers. Margaret's face floated through my memory, her voice clear as morning. Do what's right, Walt. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. I reached for the pen Agent Chen offered. Where do I sign? The next 2 hours passed in a blur of forms and statements. Agent Chen recorded my account of events, documented every conversation I could remember, photographed every piece of evidence I'd brought. She explained the investigation process, the probable timeline, the need for absolute confidentiality. Kevin couldn't know. Amber couldn't know. If word got out before agents were ready to move, evidence would disappear and the case might collapse. You'll go home and act normal. Agent Chen walked us to the elevator when we finished. If Kevin calls, answer briefly. Don't confront him. Don't accuse him. Tell him you've been busy. You'll talk soon. We need time to build the case properly. How much time? I pressed the button for the ground floor. 2 weeks, maybe 3. We need to trace the money, document the fraud, coordinate with agencies handling the offshore accounts. These things take time to do correctly. Can you wait that long without saying anything? I thought about Kevin's text message. Trust me. I thought about Lily and Mason, innocent children who'd soon learn their father was a thief. I thought about the cabin near Bend I'd never buy, the retirement I'd never have, the future stolen by someone I'd loved without reservation. I can wait. But Agent Chen, when you arrest him, I want to be there. I want Kevin to look me in the eye and understand what he's done. She studied my face for a long moment. That's not standard procedure, Mr. Harrison. It should be. I stepped into the elevator, Frank following close behind me. Victims deserve to witness justice, even when the criminal is family. Especially when the criminal is family.
The doors closed on Agent Chen's thoughtful expression. As the elevator descended toward the street level, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not relief exactly, not satisfaction. Something harder and colder. The certainty that I'd crossed the line that couldn't be uncrossed. By tomorrow, federal investigators would be combing through Kevin's financial records. By next week, they'd have enough evidence to move forward. By the end of the month, my son would be in handcuffs. And somewhere in that timeline, I'd have to decide whether I was a father who'd betrayed his son or a man who'd finally stopped letting love make him blind to theft. The hardest part about waiting for justice is pretending everything remains normal. For 13 days, I lived a double life. On the surface, I was Walt Harrison, retired aerospace engineer, going through the motions of ordinary existence. Beneath that mask, I was a federal witness helping build a case against my own son. Kevin called me 4 times during that first week. Each conversation felt like walking through a minefield, blindfolded. I kept my voice steady,
My answers vague, my suspicions buried under layers of forced normalcy that would have won me an Oscar if acting paid retirement benefits. Dad, about those accounts. Kevin's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before, anxiety masquerading as casual concern. I know you've probably checked the balances. I can explain everything. I was gripping my kitchen counter hard enough to leave nail marks in the laminate. Not now, Kevin. I've got a contractor coming to look at my roof. Can we talk this weekend? A pause that stretched too long. Sure. Yeah, this weekend. Maybe come by the house? Amber's making her famous lasagna. The kids miss you. The mention of Lily and Mason hit like a punch to the sternum. Two innocent children who had no idea their father was about to be arrested by federal agents, who'd remember their grandfather as the man who sent their daddy to prison. Sounds good. I forced brightness into my tone. Tell them Grandpa Walt will bring ice cream. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at nothing for 20 minutes. Frank found me there when he let himself in with the spare key I'd given him years ago. You okay? He set down a bag from the deli on Division Street. Brought pastrami. Figured you hadn't been eating much. He was right. Food had become an afterthought, each meal a mechanical necessity rather than pleasure. I'm questioning everything. Did I make the right choice? Should I have just confronted Kevin privately, given him a chance to make it right? Frank pulled out sandwiches and spread them on the table. Walt, you gave him 18 months to make it right. He took $340,000 instead. He's still lying to you, still pretending this is a temporary liquidity issue instead of outright theft. What exactly would confronting him accomplish except giving him time to hide more evidence? The logic made sense. It always did when Frank explained it. But logic didn't ease the weight pressing down on my chest every time I thought about the moment Kevin would realize what I'd done. Agent Chen called while we were eating. Mr. Harrison, we've made significant progress. Can you come to the office tomorrow morning? There's something you need to see. The FBI conference room looked different this time. Less sterile, more purposeful. Agent Chen had transformed one wall into a massive timeline, printed documents connected by red string like something from a crime drama. Except this wasn't television. This was my life reduced to evidence markers and transaction records. We've been busy. She gestured to the wall. Todd Collins is more than just Amber's brother. He's been running a sophisticated investment fraud scheme targeting retirees across 3 states. Your son's involvement appears to go back at least 2 years. 2 years. I studied the timeline, seeing dates that predated our conversation at Powell's Books by months. Kevin had been planning this long before he'd approached me with promises of optimized returns. Here's where it gets interesting. Agent Chen pointed to a cluster of documents on the right side. Todd has a shell company registered in Delaware, Apex Advisory Solutions. On paper, it looks legitimate. Investment services, wealth management, the usual language. In reality, it's a funnel for stolen funds. Money goes in from victims, gets moved through multiple accounts, ends up in offshore holdings that are nearly impossible to trace. And Kevin knew about this? My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Kevin was a partner. Agent Chen pulled up a legal document on her laptop. We found incorporation papers filed 6 months before he approached you. Kevin Harrison is listed as Chief Financial Officer of Apex Advisory Solutions. He wasn't some naive son manipulated by his brother-in-law. He was an active participant in a criminal enterprise. The words rearranged everything I thought I understood. This wasn't a son making one terrible mistake under bad influence. This was calculated, premeditated theft. Kevin had looked me in the eye at Powell's Books and delivered a rehearsed pitch designed specifically to exploit a father's trust. How many others? I managed to ask. We've identified 17 victims so far. Agent Chen clicked through files on her screen. Mostly retirees, all with substantial savings, all approached by either Todd or Kevin with investment opportunities too good to refuse. Combined losses exceed $4 million. $4 million. The number was incomprehensible. My $340,000 was just one piece of a larger machine designed to destroy lives and steal futures. How many other fathers had trusted their sons? How many other families had been torn apart by this scheme? We're moving forward with arrests this Friday. Agent Chen closed her laptop. Todd Collins, Kevin Harrison, and 2 other associates we've connected to the operation. We'll execute search warrants simultaneously at multiple locations. Kevin's home office, Todd's business address, several storage units where we believe they've kept physical records. Friday. 3 days away. I felt my hands start to shake and clasped them together in my lap. What do you need from me? Nothing yet. This phase is law enforcement only. But Mr. Harrison, I want to prepare you for what happens after. The arrests will be public. The media will cover this story. Your name might come up as a victim. Your relationship to Kevin definitely will. You need to be ready for attention you probably don't want. I thought about my quiet street in Cedar Hills, the neighbors who'd known me for years as the friendly engineer who kept his lawn trimmed and helped jump-start cars on cold mornings. How would they look at me when they learned my son was a federal criminal? Would they whisper that I must have failed as a father, that something in my parenting had created a man capable of this? There's something else. Agent Chen's voice softened slightly. Given your relationship to Kevin, we can't prevent you from contacting him before the arrest, but I'm asking you not to. No warnings, no confrontations, no attempts at intervention. We need this operation to proceed without complications. I won't say anything. The promise came easier than I expected. Maybe because some part of me had already severed the connection. The son I'd raised wouldn't have done this. The man about to be arrested was a stranger wearing Kevin's face. Frank drove me home in silence. The October afternoon had turned gray and cold, typical Portland weather that matched my mood perfectly. We were almost to my street when he finally spoke. You know this isn't your fault, right? Whatever Kevin became, whatever choices he made, you didn't create that. You were a good father. You are a good man. Don't let his crimes become your shame. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to separate my identity from Kevin's actions, to understand that a child's sins don't automatically reflect a parent's failures. But undoing that programming would take more than Frank's reassurance. That night, I pulled out old photo albums I hadn't opened in years.
Kevin, at 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a model rocket we'd built together. Kevin at 12, awkward and earnest in his Little League uniform. Kevin at 18, posing in his cap and gown before heading off to college on scholarships and loans I'd co-signed. Where had it gone wrong? At what point had the boy who'd cried during sad movies and helped elderly neighbors with their groceries transformed into a man who'd steal from his own father? Was it gradual, a slow erosion of values I'd tried to instill? Or was there a specific moment, a turning point where Kevin looked at his life and decided that money mattered more than integrity? Margaret's photo watched me from the mantel. She died before seeing what Kevin became, and I found myself grateful for that small mercy. She'd loved our son with the fierce protectiveness mothers possess. Learning he'd become a thief would have destroyed something essential in her. "I'm sorry, Maggie." I spoke to her photo like I had countless times since her death. "I don't know where I failed him. I don't know how to fix this." The house offered no answers, just silence and shadows and the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. Thursday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine. I was drinking coffee on my back deck when my phone rang. Amber's name on the screen sent ice through my veins. We'd barely spoken in months. Her calling now couldn't be coincidence. "Walt, hi." Her voice carried forced cheerfulness that fooled no one. "I know you and Kevin are supposed to get together this weekend, but
Something's come up. Maybe we should reschedule." My hand tightened around the phone. "What's come up?" "Oh, just work stuff. Kevin's dealing with some complicated client issues. He's been stressed lately, working long hours. Maybe give him a few weeks to sort things out?" She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to sense danger approaching. Enough to want me away from their house when whatever she feared finally arrived. "Actually, Amber, I'd really like to see the kids this weekend. It's been too long. How about I take Lily and Mason for ice cream Saturday afternoon? Give you and Kevin some time alone to handle his work stress." A pause. When she spoke again, the cheerfulness had cracked. "That's really not a good time, Walt. The kids have activities, soccer and dance. Their schedules are packed." "On Saturday?" I pressed, knowing I was being cruel but unable to stop. "Both of them have activities all day Saturday?" "Look, Walt, I'm just trying to manage everyone's expectations here. Kevin needs space right now. Family obligations aren't helpful when he's under this much pressure." Family obligations. The phrase crystallized everything I'd been feeling into sharp, cutting clarity. I'd become an obligation, an inconvenience, a problem to be managed and avoided. The man who'd given them hundreds of thousands of dollars was now someone they needed space from. "I understand completely, Amber. Tell Kevin I'll give him all the space he needs, more than he can possibly imagine." I ended the call before she could respond. Tomorrow morning, federal agents would be at their door with arrest warrants and search authorizations. Tonight was Kevin's last night of freedom, and he was spending it trying to avoid his father. The irony was almost poetic. Frank came by that evening with Chinese takeout and a bottle of decent bourbon. We ate in my living room, watching the sun set through windows that needed cleaning, but I couldn't bring myself to care about. Small domestic failures seemed meaningless when bigger failures loomed so large. Tomorrow changes everything. I set down my empty plate. By this time tomorrow, Kevin will be in federal custody. Amber will know I'm the one who turned him in. Lily and Mason will learn their grandfather destroyed their family. Or, Frank poured bourbon into 2 glasses. Kevin destroyed the family when he chose to become a criminal. Amber destroyed it by enabling him. You're just the one who stopped pretending everything was fine. The bourbon burned pleasantly. I'd been drinking more lately, not enough to be concerning, but enough to notice. Self-medication for anxiety that wouldn't fade until this whole nightmare reached its conclusion. "Will you come with me tomorrow?" I asked. "To the FBI office? Agent Chen said they'd give me updates as the arrests happen. I don't want to be alone when I find out my son's been handcuffed." Frank raised his glass. "Wouldn't be anywhere else, Walt. We're in this together until the end." We drank in comfortable silence, 2 old men who'd worked together, retired together, and now faced the consequences of other people's crimes together. Outside, Portland settled into autumn darkness. Somewhere across town, Kevin was having his last dinner as a free man. Did he sense what was coming? Was there some primal instinct warning him that his world was about to collapse? I hoped so. I hoped he spent the night unable to sleep, feeling the walls close in, understanding on some level that consequences were finally arriving. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I wanted him to have time to reflect, to remember the father he'd betrayed, to consider the retirement he'd stolen, to think about the moment he'd looked me in the eye at Powell's books and decided that money mattered more than family. My phone buzzed with a text. Kevin's name. One last message before everything fell apart. "Dad, I know things have been weird. Can we talk tomorrow? Really talk? I miss you." The manipulation was transparent now that I knew the truth. He missed me the way a con artist missed an easy mark. He wanted to talk the way a thief wanted to reassure his victim that everything stolen would eventually be returned. I typed a response. "Sure, son. Let's talk tomorrow. I have a lot to say to you." It was true, in a way. I did have things to say. Just not the things Kevin expected to hear, not the forgiveness he probably hoped for, not the understanding he definitely didn't deserve. Tomorrow, Kevin would learn that some conversations happened in FBI interrogation rooms. Some truths came with Miranda rights and criminal charges. Some family discussions involved lawyers and federal prosecutors instead of coffee and false promises. I set down my phone and finished my bourbon. Frank had fallen asleep in the recliner, his breathing steady and peaceful. I envied him that peace. Tomorrow would bring many things, but peace wasn't one of them. Friday morning arrived with the kind of stillness that precedes storms. I was awake before dawn, watching the sky lighten from black to gray through my bedroom window. Frank had stayed over, sleeping in the guest room that used to be Kevin's when he visited during college breaks, back when my son was someone I recognized. We drove to the FBI office in silence, arriving at 7:30 when the building was just coming alive with morning shift workers. Agent Chen met us in the lobby, already dressed in tactical gear that made everything suddenly real in a way paperwork never could. The operations are scheduled for 7:15. She led us to a different conference room, this one equipped with monitors showing live feeds from multiple locations. You'll be able to watch from here. Watch my son get arrested, like it was a television show. The surrealism of it threatened to overwhelm me. "Mr. Harrison, you can still leave." Agent Chen's voice held no judgment. "This isn't required of you. Many victims prefer not to witness arrests." "I need to see it." The words came out firmer than I felt. "I need to know this actually happened." The room filled with other agents as 7 o'clock approached, men and women in FBI jackets, speaking in low tones about tactical positioning and warrant execution. Frank sat beside me, his presence grounding me when everything else felt like it was spinning apart. At 7:12, Agent Chen gave the signal. The monitors blazed to life, showing aerial views and street-level cameras. I recognized Kevin's neighborhood immediately. The tree-lined streets, the expensive homes set back from the road, the manicured lawns that spoke of HOA regulations and property values.
The kind of place where federal raids weren't supposed to happen. 3 black SUVs pulled up in front of Kevin's house. Agents poured out, moving with practiced efficiency toward the front door. Someone knocked. Loud, official, unmistakable. I could see lights turning on inside the house through the windows. The door opened. Kevin stood there in pajama pants and a t-shirt, confusion written across his face in the grainy camera footage. His mouth moved, probably asking what was happening, probably still believing he could talk his way out of whatever this was. Then one agent held up the warrant, and I watched my son's face change. Confusion, to shock, to something that looked like terror. His hands came up slowly. The agents moved him aside, flooding into the house. More lights came on. I could see movement through the windows. Amber appearing, her expression twisted with panic. "They're searching the house now," Agent Chen narrated unnecessarily. "Computer equipment, financial records, anything related to the fraud operation. This will take several hours." On another monitor, Todd Collins was being led out of his Lake Oswego office in handcuffs. He was shouting something, his face red with rage. Unlike Kevin, Todd looked like a man who'd expected this eventually. Prepared, but still furious at being caught. Kevin reappeared on the first monitor, now also in handcuffs. 2 agents flanked him as they walked him toward one of the SUVs. His head was down, shoulders hunched. This wasn't the confident man who'd sat across from me at Powell's Books. This was someone whose carefully constructed world had just detonated. Amber stood on the front porch, wrapped in a robe, watching them take her husband away. Even through the poor camera quality, I could see she was crying. Behind her, partially visible through the doorway, I caught a glimpse of small figures. Lily and Mason, watching their father leave in handcuffs. The image punched through whatever emotional armor I'd built up.
Those children didn't deserve this. They hadn't stolen anything. They hadn't lied to anyone. They were just two kids whose father had made choices that would scar them for life. I need air. I stood abruptly and headed for the hallway, Frank following close behind. The corridor outside the conference room was empty and quiet. I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe through the pressure crushing my chest. Frank stood nearby, saying nothing, just being present, the way good friends do. Those kids saw everything. My voice cracked. Lillian Mason watched agents arrest their father. That's going to stay with them forever. Kevin's choices did that. Frank's tone was gentle but firm. Not you. Not the FBI. Kevin chose to commit crimes, and children witness consequences of their parents' actions every day. It's tragic, but it's not your fault. Before I could respond, Agent Chen appeared in the hallway. Mr. Harrison, Kevin's asking to speak with you. We don't have to allow it, but I wanted to give you the option. My stomach dropped. Now? Already? He's being transported to the federal courthouse for initial appearance and arraignment. He'll be processed, see a judge, probably make bail by this afternoon, but right now he's asking for you specifically. Says there's been a terrible mistake and you can clear everything up. The manipulation continued even in handcuffs. Kevin still believed he could talk his way out, use our relationship to create doubt, position himself as the victim of some misunderstanding. The audacity was breathtaking. I'll see him. I straightened up. But I want you there. I want everything recorded. No private father-son conversation that he can twist later. Agent Chen nodded. Interview room 3. 5 minutes. The walk to that room felt longer than the drive to the FBI office. Each step carried weight, finality, the knowledge that whatever happened next would define how Kevin and I ended. Not as father and son sharing coffee and conversation, as victim and criminal facing each other across an unbridgeable divide. Interview room 3 was exactly what television had taught me to expect. Small, sterile, a metal table bolted to the floor, chairs that looked deliberately uncomfortable. Kevin sat on one side, still in handcuffs, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked up when I entered, and something like hope flickered across his face. Dad, thank God. You have to tell them this is all a mistake. I was helping you invest, just like we discussed. There's been some terrible confusion with account numbers and transfers, but it's all legitimate. You know I'd never steal from you. I sat down across from him, Agent Chen standing by the door, another agent in the corner with a camera. The recording light blinked red. Everything captured. Everything permanent. $340,000, Kevin. I kept my voice level. Gone from my accounts in 18 months. Moved through shell companies and offshore accounts I never authorized. That's not confusion. That's theft. His expression shifted, recalculating. Dad, it's more complicated than you understand. Todd had these investment opportunities and the returns were real, but there were timing issues with liquidity. Everything was going to be replaced with profits. I was going to make you more money than you'd ever had. You were Chief Financial Officer of Apex Advisory Solutions. I pulled out copies of the incorporation documents Agent Chen had shown me. You registered a Delaware shell company 6 months before approaching me. This wasn't about helping me invest. This was about using our relationship to access money for your fraud operation. His face went pale. Who told you that? What lies have they been feeding you? 17 victims, Kevin. Over $4 million stolen. I leaned forward. I'm not even your first target. I'm just the one who was stupid enough to be your father. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. The mortgage on that house, Amber's spending, the kids' private school tuition. Do you know what it cost to maintain that lifestyle? I needed options, opportunities. Todd offered solutions. So you stole from your father. My voice stayed quiet, deadly calm. You looked me in the eye and lied. You used Mom's memory to manipulate me. You took money I'd saved for 40 years and funneled it through criminal enterprises. I was going to pay you back. Tears started running down his face. I swear, Dad, I was going to replace every penny once the investments matured. You have to believe me. The way you paid back the other 17 victims? I stood up. Kevin, you're not sorry you stole from me. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. Dad, please. He lunged forward as much as the handcuffs allowed. Don't do this. Don't abandon me. I'm your son. Family doesn't give up on family. The words hung in the air between us. Family doesn't give up on family. The same principle I'd lived by for 68 years. The same belief that had made me an easy target. You abandoned our family when you chose to become a criminal. I walked toward the door, then turned back. You abandoned me every time you lied, every time you transferred money you knew I hadn't approved, every time you spent stolen funds while pretending everything was legitimate. I didn't give up on family, Kevin. You did. His face crumbled completely. What about Lily and Mason? Are you giving up on them too? They need their grandfather. The blow landed exactly where he'd aimed it. Those kids were innocent, and I loved them fiercely. But Kevin was using them as shields, emotional leverage to manipulate me into protecting him from consequences. Lily and Mason will always be my grandchildren. My throat tightened. But their father is going to prison for crimes he committed. That's not my choice. It's yours. You did this to them, not me. I left before he could respond, before the tears threatening to spill could give him ammunition. Agent Chen followed me out, closing the door on Kevin's sobs that echoed down the sterile hallway. He'll be processed and arraigned within a few hours. She walked beside me back toward the conference room. Given the severity of the charges and the offshore accounts involved, the prosecutor will argue he's a flight of risk.
But he'll probably make bail if someone can post it. Amber's parents have money. I felt hollow inside, emptied out. They'll bail him out, then he'll be released with monitoring pending trial. Agent Chen stopped at the conference room door. Mr. Harrison, you should know that Kevin will likely contact you again. Attempts at reconciliation, manipulation, appeals to family loyalty. You need to be prepared for that. I won't answer. The decision came easily. Whatever we were, it's over. He stopped being my son when he started being a criminal. Frank was waiting in the conference room, the monitors now showing agents loading boxes of evidence into vehicles. The search of Kevin's house had yielded computers, file cabinets full of documents, even a safe hidden in the garage containing cash and additional records. They found over $50,000 in cash. Agent Chen pointed to one monitor. Bundled in the garage safe, plus multiple hard drives with encrypted files we're working to access. This operation was more extensive than we initially realized. How long until trial? I watched the boxes being loaded, each one representing another piece of evidence against my son. Federal cases take time, 6-month minimum, possibly longer if they fight the charges. Agent Chen pulled up her tablet. But between the documentary evidence, the victim testimony, and the forensic accounting, this is solid. The prosecutor is confident about conviction. Conviction meant prison. Real prison, not house arrest or minimum security country clubs. Kevin was 42 years old. A conviction on these charges could mean a decade behind bars. He'd be in his 50s when he got out. Lily would be an adult. Mason would be nearly grown. The life he'd built would be ashes. The career, the reputation, the comfortable existence in West Lynn, all of it destroyed by greed and the arrogant belief that he was smart enough to avoid consequences. Can I go home now? I was suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Of course. Agent Chen walked us to the elevator. We'll be in touch about depositions and trial testimony. Try to rest, Mr. Harrison. The hardest part is over. But she was wrong. The hardest part wasn't watching Kevin get arrested. It wasn't confronting him in that interview room. The hardest part would be living with the aftermath, rebuilding a life from the wreckage of betrayal, learning to trust again after the person you trusted most proved unworthy, finding peace when justice still felt like failure. Frank drove me home through morning traffic. Portland moved around us, oblivious to the small tragedy that had unfolded in a federal building downtown. People headed to work, dropped kids at school, stopped for coffee. Normal Friday activities in a normal city where most fathers didn't watch their sons get arrested. My house looked the same as when I'd left it. Same cracked driveway, same porch light that flickered. But I felt different walking through that door. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. The burden of Kevin's theft had shifted from secret shame to public record. The weight of that knowledge sat differently on my shoulders. Frank made coffee while I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd first examined those devastating bank statements, where I'd made the decision to call the FBI, where my old life had ended and this strange new existence had begun. "Your phone's been buzzing." Frank set down a mug in front of me. "Probably news spreading." I checked the screen. 7 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, 3 voicemails, 2 text messages from people in my contact list asking if I'd heard about Kevin Harrison being arrested. The news was out. By tonight, it would be in every local media outlet. By tomorrow, neighbors would know. By next week, everyone in my social circle would have heard that Walt Harrison's son was a federal criminal who'd stolen from his own father. I turned off my phone and pushed it aside. Frank sat across from me, drinking his coffee, letting silence do the heavy lifting that words couldn't manage. Outside my kitchen window, a bird landed on the feeder I'd hung years ago. It pecked its seeds, unbothered by human drama. The simplicity of its existence felt enviable. No family to betray you, no trust to be broken, just survival and instinct and the uncomplicated business of being alive. I'd survived too. Barely, but definitely. The man who'd signed those power of attorney documents 3 months ago had been naive, trusting to the point of foolishness. The man sitting at this table had learned harsh lessons about the distance between who we hope people are and who they actually reveal themselves to be. Kevin would face trial. He'd probably be convicted. He'd go to prison. And I'd learned to live with being the father who turned in his son, the grandfather who'd chosen justice over family unity, the man who discovered that love without boundaries wasn't love. It was just enabling, dressed up in prettier language. 6 months passed like water through a sieve. Winter came to Portland, blanketing the city in rare snow that transformed Cedar Hills into something from a postcard. I watched it fall from my kitchen window, drinking coffee that tasted better now that I could afford the good beans again. The trial had been scheduled for March. Kevin made bail, as predicted, posted by Amber's parents, who'd mortgaged their own home to free their son-in-law. He'd been prohibited from contacting me directly, a restraining order I'd requested through Agent Chen. But that hadn't stopped the letters. They arrived weekly, handwritten on expensive stationery that probably cost more than it should. Each one a variation on the same theme. Apologies mixed with justifications, admissions of wrongdoing followed by explanations about pressure and circumstances, promises to make everything right once he'd served whatever minimal sentence his lawyer could negotiate. I read the first few, then started throwing them away unopened. Frank had been right from the beginning. Kevin wasn't sorry he'd stolen from me. He was sorry the theft had consequences he couldn't charm his way out of. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with 16 other victims who'd lost their retirement savings to Kevin and Todd's scheme. We were a diverse group, teachers and small business owners, nurses and accountants, people who'd worked hard and saved carefully, only to have it stolen from them by men who'd looked them in the eye and promised security. The evidence was overwhelming. Forensic accountants traced every transfer, documented every lie, connected every shell company back to the operation Todd and Kevin had built. The encrypted hard drives yielded emails discussing victim targeting strategies, text messages between Kevin and Todd joking about how easy it was to manipulate people who trusted them. Reading those messages and court transcripts
felt like being stabbed repeatedly. My son had laughed about stealing from me, had bragged to Todd about how simple it was to exploit our relationship, had referred to me as a guaranteed revenue stream in one particularly cruel exchange. Kevin took the stand in his own defense, against his lawyer's advice. He spoke about growing up without wealth, about wanting to provide for his children, about investment opportunities that seemed legitimate until everything collapsed. He cried. He apologized. He looked directly at me in the gallery and said he'd spent every day since his arrest wishing he could undo his mistakes. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud. Kevin's face went ashing when the verdict was read. Amber sobbed in the row behind him. His lawyer immediately began discussing appeals. Sentencing came 2 months later. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd clearly seen too many cases like this, showed no mercy. 8 years in federal prison. Restitution to all victims to be paid from any assets Kevin possessed or would earn after release. A permanent ban from working in financial services. Kevin was let out in handcuffs again, this time without the shock of the first arrest. This time he knew exactly where he was going and for how long.
He didn't look at me as they took him away. Maybe he'd finally understood that the father who'd trusted him no longer existed. I received a check 3 weeks after sentencing. $68,000, my share of assets recovered from accounts the FBI had seized. Not even a fifth of what had been stolen, but more than I'd expected to see again. The restitution would take years, possibly decades, and would likely never cover the full amount, but it was something. Frank helped me open a new investment account with a reputable firm downtown. We met with an advisor who came highly recommended, asked all the right questions, verified credentials, checked references. I signed papers authorizing only myself to make transactions, no power of attorney, no family members with access, just me making decisions about money I'd earned. The cabin near Bend was no longer possible. My retirement dreams had downsized considerably, but I found a small place in Selwood, closer to the river, with a view of trees instead of neighbors. I could afford it with the recovered funds and what remained of my Social Security. It wasn't what I'd planned, but it was mine. Lily sent me a letter in April, a crayon drawing of our family, carefully labeled, Grandpa Walt, Daddy, Mommy, me, Mason. Daddy was drawn behind bars, an honest representation that broke my heart. Below the drawing, in her careful child's handwriting, I miss you. Please visit. I called Amber for the first time since the arrest. The conversation was stilted, painful, full of things neither of us wanted to say. But we agreed on supervised visits with the kids. Not at their house, neutral territory. A park, a museum, places where Lily and Mason could remember that their grandfather still existed, even though their father was gone. The first visit happened on a Saturday in May. Waterfront park, under spring sunshine that made everything seem possible again. Lily was taller than I remembered, quieter. Mason clung to my hand like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. We fed ducks, ate ice cream, talked about school and friends and everything except the reason we'd gone months without seeing each other. When Amber came to collect them, Lily hugged me tight and whispered that she was glad I came back. I hadn't left them, I wanted to say. Their father had created a situation where seeing each other became complicated. But she was 12 years old and already carrying too much weight, so I just hugged her back and promised to come again next month. Frank and I had dinner that night at a restaurant on Hawthorne, celebrating nothing in particular and everything in general. I'd survived. Barely, incompletely, but definitely. I'd lost money and trust, and a relationship with my son, but I'd gained something harder to quantify. Self-respect, boundaries, the knowledge that I could make difficult choices when necessary. You did the right thing, Frank raised his glass of wine. I know it doesn't always feel that way, but you did. I clinked my glass against his. Most days I believe that. Some days I'm not sure. But either way, it's done. The server brought our food, and we ate while Portland hummed around us. A city full of people carrying their own complicated stories, their own betrayals and recoveries, their own attempts to build lives from whatever pieces remained after disasters struck. Kevin would serve his 8 years. He'd be 50 when he got out, facing a world that had moved on without him. His children would be adults. His marriage might survive or might not. His relationship with me was permanently altered, shifted from father and son to something with no clear definition. I'd be 76 when he was released. Older, hopefully wiser, possibly more forgiving. Or maybe not. Maybe some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome, some wounds too deep to fully heal. Time would tell, and I'd learn to be patient with outcomes I couldn't control. For now, I had my small place in Selwood. I had Frank's friendship. I had visits scheduled with grandchildren who still wanted their Grandpa Walt in their lives. I had enough money to be comfortable, if not wealthy, enough security to sleep without panic attacks about finances. The FBI had caught the thieves. The courts had delivered justice. The system had worked exactly as it was designed to, protecting victims and punishing criminals regardless of family relationships. My son had thought he could steal my retirement. He'd been wrong about that, and wrong about so much else. The FBI had other plans, and so it turned out had I. Plans that involved choosing myself over enabling, justice over misplaced loyalty, truth over comfortable lies. Walking home that night, I passed houses lit from within, families visible through windows going about their evening routines. Some of them probably faced betrayals I knew nothing about. Others lived in blessed ignorance of how quickly trust could shatter. I'd been both people, the one who trusted too much and the one who'd learned better. The journey from naive to cautious had cost me nearly everything. But standing on the other side, scarred but intact, I had found something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not perfect, not complete, but real. The kind that comes from knowing you survived something that should have destroyed you and came out the other side still capable of feeding ducks with your grandchildren on Saturday mornings. That was enough. That would have to be enough. And some days, when the light hit just right, it actually was.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.